Hi, welcome. I'm Dr. Zach Korwin. I'm here with Dr. Jeffrey Hoos and Mike Gantos, and we're going to be discussing some of the strategies Jeffrey has used to grow his practice to a $6.5 million behemoth, and how I've grown my practices between 40 and 80% in the first year. There's some great information in here. I hope you guys like listening to it as much as we enjoyed recording it. We're going to start by talking about the new golden age of dentistry and what opportunities that presents to younger and older doctors alike.
Over 50% of the dentists are over 60 years old, or at least approaching 60 years old. The segment between 40 and 55, which is your most productive years, happens to be the smallest slice of the dental population. High demand and very low supply. So what it says to me is, for those who want to be in private practice, own their own practice, we are approaching the next golden wave of dentistry. More services to provide, more people who want them, and fewer suppliers. Does this make sense to you, though?
Yeah, it does make sense. And it's interesting because that's what I've been involved with a great deal. I'm 35 now, and I've worked in a number of different offices, all different styles of offices, fee-for-service, full insurance offices. And, the challenging part of all of it as a younger person is the transition in and making sure that the practice remains successful as the previous doctor transitions out. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there's a misunderstanding sometimes of what it is you're actually selling, quote unquote, as a dentist, because you're a business and you have a product, and most people think the product is your dentistry. And so you go to great lengths to perfect your dentistry and perfect your craft, but really the product that you're selling is you as the provider. And you recognize that when a patient comes into you and they have a treatment plan that's printed out from Dentrix from another provider, and it's everything that you would have treatment planned for the patient, and the patient hands it to you and says, I want you to do it instead of this other guy. And why would they do that? Because, you're both qualified to do the dentistry. You have to understand when you transition into an office that the patients are used to and they like the product that they've been buying for the past 20 or 25 years. And so you have to almost become a chameleon and mimic the previous dentist in order to have the practice continue to be successful.
Yes, you have to identify, first of all, that are patients who just want the service done by a dentist, and a dentist is a dentist is a dentist. And those who are looking for a healthcare provider for their oral health needs and want a relationship with that provider.
So what we're really leading to here is that there are two types of interactions. There are transactions and there are relationships. And that's the thing we have to really think about. That if you want to go and buy a bespoke suit in Madison Avenue in Manhattan, that is a very different purchase than going to TJ Maxx or Marshall's and buying a suit off the rack. And the person that is demanding or wants that customized suit has one level of expectation, and the person who's going to TJ Maxx or Marshall's and getting a suit has a different expectation. The key to this whole thing for me is that the person who is providing the custom suit has to be able to deliver the product and deliver the experience that that person expects.
And the real challenge in that is doing that, from a dental perspective. You have insurance utilization, in which every customer comes in and wants a custom suit, but they're all going to pay you a different fee. And B, as the suit salesman example, having the consistency to deliver the same essentially level of care to every single customer who walks in the door. When you're focused on, 2 or 3 or 4 customers a day, that's not as challenging. When you have a busy dental practice and you're working very hard physically, to be able to deliver the same consistent level of care is challenging. And I think we've all run into that where, we all want to do the best we can for all of our patients all the time. But how many patients do you see a day? 4,000? And at the end of the day, you get tired. It's not like you can feel bad about not being able to deliver things consistently sometimes.
So what it really comes down to is, how do we best develop those relationships with our patients and at the same time have a balance in our lives?
The amount of work that goes into owning a practice, practicing the dentistry, doing the HR component of it, and still trying to focus on making every patient feel like they're special was too much for me, and it's always been. I mean, before even I was a practice owner and I was an associate, I'd work evenings and then I'd drive 2 hours home. I wouldn't get home till 10 o'clock. And by the time I got home, I don't care. I need to go to sleep. All the things that I've ever read that are relationship builders with your patients and all of the extra mile, high touch stuff fell by the wayside because I was just so exhausted all the time. On one of my 2-hour commute drives, thinking, hey, whatever happened to that patient, that guy who came in and he had a $50,000 treatment plan and I never saw him again. What happened? And it became clear to me that there wasn't really a system that I had in place in my office in order to track these people consistently. We did have different types of software products that would give you lists of patients. I mean, even Dentrix or SoftDent, they can run you reports of patients who have outstanding treatment. The problem ended up being that, if you present a patient with they have a missing tooth, so you present them with an implant and a partial and a bridge, and then you do the implant. I never deleted out the bridge and the partial. So, over the course of many years, you have these patients who, quote unquote, have treatment, but it ends up being a whole bunch of just old treatment plans that aren't really that valuable. I just came to the realization that, what happens if I get a patient to come in to the office, eventually I will capture their treatment. And so I tried to simplify the whole thing down into just making sure that people are coming back. There's no reason that anyone should leave the office and not have a next appointment scheduled, whether they have treatment or they need to come back for a cleaning, they need to come back to the office. And so if it takes me, 6 months to get that patient back in, when they come in, I'm going to talk to them about that missing tooth and they're going to eventually do the treatment, or they're going to get annoyed at me and leave.
What's so interesting about this is my father had a little tiny grocery store in Old Town, Maine. And his rule was no one leaves the store without a sale. And the sale could be a stick of gum or an apple, but no one leaves the store without a sale. And what's interesting about all of this is it amazes me that people allow people to leave their offices without some kind of an appointment. And there was a very famous doctor in my training. And I said to him once, I notice you always put a stitch in these extraction cases. I'm curious, why do you do that? He goes, because I want to see this patient again. I want to touch this patient again. I want this patient to know that I'm taking care of them. And so my phrase is high touch with my patients. And so what I think, Zach, you've developed is the ability to use technology to develop these relationships and have high touch. So when you deliver a denture for a patient, and this makes my staff crazy, actually, but when I deliver a denture, they know that I can only do it on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday because I don't work on Fridays. I need to see the patient the next day. When I do a surgical procedure, I need to see them in a week. And oh, by the way, Mrs. Jones, we've placed your implant crown and I will see you at your next re-care visit with your hygienist, Kim. And I always introduce the patient to the fact that their hygienist is either Lori, Kim, Sarah, Tanya, whoever it is, because they have the relationship with the patient as well as that I have the relationship with the patient. And the success in my practice, quite frankly, over the last 41 years has been the relationships with my patients. I'm one of the candlestick makers, bakers of these people's lives. And that's really important. And those relationships that haven't worked out, I didn't have that relationship with the patient.
There's an adage in marketing that you have to get in front of people at least 3 times before they'll actually listen to what you're saying. And so I do the same thing in my office that you were just describing, that every patient who comes in, I try to get them back in front of me at least 3 times. So if a patient comes in for an emergency visit and I know that they're going to be sort of fly by night, I'll have them come in for the exam. And then most of the time I'll try to do the treatment the same day, but I always schedule them for a post-op. And even patients who they have a stick with a bandana attached to it, they're leaving town the next day, they always come back in for their post-op. And so the first visit when they come in, I only focus on their problem. And then the next visit when they come back for the post-op, I look at them and I say, oh my God, things look fantastic. You're healing so well. I'm never that effusive, but things are healing very well. And in order to stop this from happening the next time, why don't we have you back in for cleaning? We'll do a full look at all your teeth and we'll try to take it from there. And if I can do that over the course of 3 visits, which sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, they have a really, really high likelihood of converting into patients of record versus emergency patients. There's an additional touch that you can get even prior to the patients coming in. This is something I learned from my dad. He calls his new patients the night before their visits just to see, hey, do you have any questions? Trying to get that first touch sort of out of the way. And he's been doing it for long enough that he told me when I first started doing it, if the patient doesn't return your call or doesn't answer, they're not showing up to their appointment. So you can actually guide your scheduling based on whether or not the patient responds to you. Today's day and age, people text. So calling is a little bit, I get calls all the time that I ignore, even if it's from someone important. And if they don't leave a voicemail, then I never choose to call them back. But from a text message perspective, one of the things that I automated completely is that first touch to the patient who's coming in as a new patient. And I just did this, when was it, last week? And I had a patient who texted me back. So automatically I reached out to them and said, hey, it's Dr. Korwin. How you doing? Do you have any questions before your appointment? And they reached out and said, I'm really anxious. I haven't been to a doctor in a long time. And I texted back, it's really great that you're choosing to come in. We're going to take very good care of you. We'll see you tomorrow. And when that patient walked in, instead of that, the look in their eyes that you get when you walk in the room and they're terrified of you, it was just a really easy interaction. And so all these patients who you reach out to prior to their appointment, I walk into those appointments now and I say, hi, I'm Dr. Korwin. It's good to meet you in person. Let's talk about your issues. And there's no, I used to spend a long time trying to build rapport with the patient, and I just don't anymore. I can just walk right in and they already know that I'm a decent human being because I reached out to them the night before their appointment. By automating that, it really eliminates the life that gets in the way of doing that. I mean, how many people have ever done that for a patient ever, A, and B, how many people have done that consistently? Because I have 2 kids under 5. I have a life going on outside of my dental practice, and it's not the only thing that I think about. So to have essentially a personal assistant who's doing all this stuff for me is invaluable. I mean,
and that personal assistant never calls in sick, is never late, and never gives you any kind of attitude for doing a good job. Michael, you've been in the game for 37 years?
Yes.
37 years.
Started very young.
What would you say is the consistent thing that you see in successful practices?
Well, this is very interesting listening to the two of your perspectives. I've been in hundreds of dental offices and know literally hundreds of dentists over the years in the wide range of patients and treatment. To answer your question is relationships. The better your relationship you have with your patient and your patient has with you and your dental office and team, the more success you're going to have as a provider and the more success that patient's going to have as a patient, which is really the bottom line. We want happy, successful patients, and there's more than one way to achieve that. The whole gray scale truly exists as far as dentists and dental practices. What I like to get my dentists to do is identify who they are, what type of practice they want to have, what type of patients they want to treat, and build it from the base up. If you're looking to provide a fee-for-service type experience, then you really have to create a customer service relationship-oriented practice that attracts that type of patient to you. If you are in an area where you want to see a lot of patients, have a big practice, take insurance, you're going to have a well-oiled machine. That means being an incredible leader, providing the tools for your team and being able to oversee the process. One of the great things about the automated patient experience is you are actually making your front office more efficient and making their job easier, where everything that you've ever asked your front office to do has made their job more difficult to do in the same amount of time. I think is just an amazing step forward for all practices, regardless of what size you are, whether you are a small boutique practice or a large volume practice with many associates and many providers and a half a dozen hygienists. That being said, how do we make the patient experience better, more fulfilling, more trusting? And that comes from the ground up.
But here's the interesting thing that I never have been able to figure out. So starting in 1978 with a one-chair walk-up on the second floor in Stratford, Connecticut, and building this large practice and expanding, at some point you reach a capacity that you're no longer able to fulfill the demand. There was a practice we both know of. The guy had been in practice for 50 years with 2 chairs and a part-time hygienist. And I asked him, can you explain to me what happened to all your patients? And he said, I don't know, they just went away, as he puffed on his cigar. And, Togo says we've seen the enemy, and it is us. And yet, one of the most successful practices in my area was probably the worst dentist I'd ever seen in my life. Could do crown preps in 30 seconds, but his patients loved him. So there's a fine line between providing the highest quality care to the most number of patients while maintaining that balance between your personal and professional life.
The dentists listening have to self-identify. They have to identify who they are and what type of practice they want. And I'd like to speak generally into what little nuggets each one can take that's going to fit in their practice, because not every nugget is going to fit in every practice the same. Your passion for dentistry is unsurpassed. Your one-chair walk-up in Stratford, Connecticut, you're as passionate today as you were then about dentistry, and you've evolved continuously. Most dentists find their path, and I think dentists who have a boutique practice, who are passionate about dentistry, they love their patients. They care a lot about their patients. Having that relationship with them means a lot to them. And then there are others who are trying to provide a service to their community and handle health, function, and aesthetics, and really don't want that relationship with their patients. And that's okay.
Right.
Just know who you are, know what you want, and have a path to get there.
It's so interesting you say that, because one of my best friends was an anesthesiologist. I said to him, why did you become an anesthesiologist? He goes, it's very simple. I hate people. And I think also your point about passion, there isn't a single thing that I do in my dental practice today that was what I learned in dental school. And it goes from injections to how teeth are restored. Implantology, what are you kidding? Dental bonding, what are you kidding? If you put acid on teeth, you're going to kill teeth. And I think that's the great thing that, Zach, you've brought forward, is you've taken a technology that is alien to my generation and allowed me to incorporate it into my systems to make my life easier.
It's truly provided a solution.
A solution.
A solution. There's a problem out there. We all have problems. There's multiple problems. Wouldn't it be nice to have a solution that's a simple solution? Automated patient experience has absolutely done that. I go back to each of our listeners and say, let's identify who you are, what you're building, what the problems are, and how the solution is going to bring you to where you want to be. And communication with patients, building relationships with patients where they feel you care about them, to me, is numero uno. Every doctor I've ever talked to about how did you build your practice when you started out, they talk about calling their patients and checking on them afterwards, especially after an invasive procedure. If that works so well, and word of mouth experience is the best solution for growing your practice, what happens when you start to grow? That becomes less easy and falls by the wayside and becomes less important to you. And then you turn around and you start spending thousands of dollars on marketing and team building and who's doing this and who's doing that. Wait a minute. The most effective way to grow your practice was word of mouth referrals coming from patients who realize how much you care, because nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. So it seemed to me, going back to the basics and utilizing today's technology to make it possible.
My first patient, Mr. Larry Maher, that I did my first extraction on, the only reason I called him that evening was I wanted to make sure he didn't die. And then what happened was Mr. Maher said to me, "Thank you so much for calling me. Don't ever change." And I actually wrote an article about it for Dental Economics back in 1982. And the title was, "Don't Ever Change." Some patients, for an MOD, BL, QRST, you don't even need to give them any lidocaine. You just sit down and prep the tooth. And does that bother you now? It doesn't bother you. It doesn't bother me. And then you have another patient that you start the handpiece and they start to cry. So everyone needs a different level of relationship, and it's understanding that. And I think that this automated patient experience allows us to do that. And you said it, Michael, the best. It gives us a solution for a problem we know we have to manage if we want to grow a successful practice.
I think everybody knows that relationships are the key to success in the office. Knowing it is different than being able to accomplish it. Your story, Jeffrey, about the guy with the part-time hygienist and he practiced the same way and his patients all left him. He's like me, really. I mean, I think as an introverted person, I like working with my hands as a dentist. I don't really like talking to patients as a dentist. Honestly, I don't enjoy doing. I mean, I do sometimes, but it takes a lot out of me. I was the anesthesiologist, and I used to do a lot of cases under sedation, and I could do that for 14 hours a day and be perfectly fine because doing the work is enjoyable to me. The difficult part sometimes is talking to the patients and having that relationship and feeling like you have to be sort of on all the time in order to get them to like you. Because you really do have to do that kind of stuff. The thing about what I built is that you can recognize that you need to behave in a certain way in order to be successful as a dentist, but it's also exhausting to do that day in and day out. And so if you don't care necessarily about the relationships with the patients and you go in to do your work with your hands, if you're a good dentist who gets good stuff accomplished for your patients, then that's a big win. But it doesn't always lead to referrals. It doesn't lead to the practice where you have so many patients where they're fighting each other to get through the door. This is a bridge, really, for people who have difficulty building relationships with their patients, not through any fault of their own, but just because it's cool to be an introverted person who has difficulty doing that kind of stuff. Keeping the consistency doing that for someone like me is challenging because it takes a lot of effort. I think, for you, it's easy because you want to do it. And so to do things every single day that you don't necessarily want to do becomes challenging. But if that's the way that you have to do it in order to be successful, then that's the way you have to do it in order to be successful. I think, one of the other things that you guys have touched on a couple of times is the long-term success of the office. I don't think anyone would argue that the long-term success of your office is based on the relationships with your patients. I mean, even corporate buyers understand that to the point where you can't sell your practice without staying on for a number of years because they know that your relationships are really the product that they're buying and they want to preserve that as much as possible. I think that the challenge sometimes is that we focus a lot as dentists on the long-term success of the practice. So doing these kinds of things, making comfort care calls and reaching out to patients, that's not going to move the needle tomorrow. It really won't. It'll start the process, and over the course of time, it'll lead to more referrals. It'll lead to more satisfied patients, and it'll lead to increased case acceptance. You said something to me the other day, and someone else actually with a similar style of practice echoed it, where you had a patient who came in and was scheduled on your schedule for like a 29 DO, and you were really pissed off about it. And then you looked in their mouth and you saw that they had number 30 and 31 failing amalgams. And you said to them, hey, why don't we just do the 2 crowns on those teeth and we'll do the 29 DO also. And so you snatched success from the jaws of defeat by doing a larger amount of work on a patient who was there for a lesser amount of work. You need a relationship with that patient in order to be able to get that patient to approve that from you. And in my office, I'm still a new doctor in that office. It's been about 2.5 years and I'm still meeting patients who I haven't met before. COVID was obviously part of that. But I've done that with patients. And when I do that with patients, they leave the practice.
But the interesting is you also have to have the systems within your office to be able to
accommodate it.
To accommodate that. And there's this transactional analysis model that you have to use as having an adult to adult conversation versus an adult child conversation. And as I've said many times, you have to set that patient up and you basically have to say, is this something you truly want to do? I mean, it happened yesterday in my office. We were putting an implant on tooth number 14 and the patient said, boy, that was really easy to do. How long is it going to take for me to come back and have this tooth number 19 implant done? And I said, if you'd like to do it today, we can take care of it today. Really? We can take care of it for today. Now I have a team that understands this. And 14 minutes later, there's another implant on tooth number 19. But I also did something for that patient. I said, you spent X number of dollars to have tooth number 14 done. And if you'd like to do the tooth number 19, I'm willing to do this for $500 less. Despite what the Kodak study says, we still got to do that. And we still got to do that in the same amount of time. And that patient said, yeah, I'd really like to do that. But you can't do that on the first date. And that's the important key.
And you touched on something there too, that your team is aware of the way things work in your practice. I'm involved much more in transition practices than I'm involved in mature practices like yours. And in a transition practice, it's very difficult because you have to toe the line, like I said, between what you think is right from a treatment planning philosophy and also from a patient care philosophy and what the previous doctor felt was right as well. And so you have a whole group of patients who were subscribed to his way of thinking, and then you're trying to bring them to your way of thinking. And a lot of the times there's different styles of practice. There's very conservative styles of practice, and then there's very aggressive styles of practice. And if you're trying to do something which is probably a little bit more on the aggressive side, talking to a patient in an office where the patients are used to doing MODBL amalgams with pins, and if you say the word crown, they leave the office, then they're going to flee. So it does take a lot of time to transition those patients, and you can, and I've done so successfully, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of relationship building to get those patients to understand that crown is not a dirty word. Just because it costs some money, you're going to be saving money in the long term because you're not going to be redoing the MODB amalgam every 2 years for the rest of your life. That level of trust building with the patients is a long-term growth factor for the office. The short-term growth factor, the things that move the needle very quickly, and this is the stuff that people are more interested in, are things that already exist in your office. And so part of the game is setting up the office to be successful long-term, which you're not going to really reap the benefits of for probably at least a year. And that's things like building more trust with your patients, building more relationships with your patients. That leads to more Google reviews online. And then those Google reviews lead to more patients. But that's not an overnight situation that you can turn it on and then have your practice double overnight.
Success is not an overnight.
But it can be, actually. And so in my office, we grew 80% in collections in the first year. I did a lot of the things we're talking about by building relationships with the patients. And there's also a bunch of short-term stuff that I did in order to really, heavily grow the practice very quickly. And this was an office that was grossing essentially the same amount for the past 15 years. And then when I started and implemented these systems and made these changes, we doubled pretty much overnight.
So that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about the next golden wave of dentistry. In Jeffrey's case, over the last 40 years of dentistry, there have been, I believe, 2 true golden waves of dentistry. But his success is built layer on top of layer, year after year, CE credit after CE credit, and to where he's such a high demand KOL today with an amazing team who knows exactly what is expected of them when they come into work every day. It's patient experience. Today's dentist has the luxury of all of this technology at their fingertips. And as I said earlier, and I truly believe that the deck is stacked in their favor in spite of the negatives of declining insurance reimbursement and financial pressures and all of these other things. The supply and demand is in the doctor's favor. The biggest challenge the doctor has is figuring out who they are and what they want and how they're going to get there. There's plenty of tools to help them get where they want to go.
It's all of those things that incrementally build your practice from the moment the phone rings to the interaction at the front desk, to bringing the patient back, to having the operatory smell correct. It is a total patient experience. And I talk about this a lot. When you think about the best restaurants you've been in, not only is the appetizer great, the entree is great, and the cup of coffee at the end is great. And it's that total experience that you have within that practice. And following up that night with saying to your patient or calling or texting and interacting just enhances that experience.
That truly is the punctuation mark on a good experience, is that extra attention at the end of the day.
So your office, I mean, I've likened it before to a mature oak tree, and it didn't get that way overnight. You know, a lot of doctors that I've met, and myself certainly, like, we all aspire to having that kind of practice, and it does take time, and it's not going to be an instantaneous situation. I think that what a lot of doctors struggle with is accepting insurance and trying to manage this stuff while also having an insurance-based practice. Every doctor who accepts insurance is aware of the fact that you're incentivized to spend less time with the patient. That's really what ends up happening.
So what this technology, Zach, allows us to do is those doctors who are, like I am, fee-for-service, those doctors that are handcuffed by dental practices that are insurance-based, this technology will allow them to get out of that rat race.
Well, that's correct. And that's my whole point, is that, you know, in order to build that level of customer experience with a patient and do that in an office where you take a 70% write-off on your crowns or your fillings, that's tricky. And balancing the overhead required to do that, you have to have good team members who stick around for a long time, and they have to be paid well, and they have to get good benefits. Otherwise, they're going to come and go. And balancing that with the reimbursement that you get from an insurance company is tricky. Having an automated system that's very, very inexpensive in order to help with that is invaluable. I mean, there's no reason why you wouldn't be able to implement that in an office, because it's just going to do everything for you, essentially. It replaces a lot of the things that you're currently using in your office. So it does a lot of things that other softwares do, and it does things that are very unique and does them in a way that nobody else does. And what we're focused on is really trying to give that extra step of knowledge. I mean, some software programs are analytics based, and they'll just throw a bunch of numbers in front of you, and then it's up to you to figure out what to do with the numbers. And so it's great to look at your production and collections sitting on a piece of paper, but what do you actually do? What's that next step in order to grow that kind of stuff? You know, I wanted to return to one of my previous points, which was that every dentist aspires to getting their office to where Jeffrey's office is. I mean, really, truly, it's a incredibly successful office. It grosses probably more than, 8 or 9 dental offices combined, and it does so in a nice atmosphere. It's not a mill. It's not crazy. It really is the type of practice that everyone would want to work in. But when you're my age and you're starting out and you don't have a following yet, and it's not easy for you necessarily to build relationships and build that following quick, then you're in a situation where you're facing down a long-term problem. And so I wanted to return to short-term success rate. You know, whether you're starting a practice or whether you're buying a practice, there's a lot of stuff already in your practice that you're missing. And I know that because that's the kind of stuff that I focused on to grow my practice 80% in collections in the first year. And it's really simple stuff. And it boils down to essentially two things: making sure that the patients come into your office, and then collecting money from them when they do come into the office. Sounds simple. So I was reading a book recently, and it was describing things that are simple, but aren't easy. And so take, for example, basketball or golf. I mean, think about that. What's the game? Put the ball in the hole. It's simple, but it's certainly not easy. And if you look at humanity's ability to be consistent, that is interesting. I mean, we're not really wired to be consistent, right? And if you look at a basketball player's free throw rating, if a basketball player standing at a line with no defenders in his face at all, literally just has to put the ball in the hole and can do that 90% of the time, which means he misses 1 out of 10 shots, he is a fantastic free throw shooter. 90% of the time. Think about if your crowns or your fillings failed 10% of the time. 1 out of 10 fillings that you did, or 1 out of 10 crowns that you did, failed, right? So you have to keep it in perspective. So we're not really hardwired to be consistent. And that's where technology comes in. I mean, the whole reason we invent technology in the first place is to be able to do things more consistent. That's why you have a drill, so you can drill a hole in a straight line over and over and over again. So rather a drill press, not a drill like a dentist drill.
The non-clinical guy would say to that, you're assuming all of the responsibility of that 10% failure when, in fact, the patient is a huge contributing factor. What their habits are, what kind of changes to their diet, medications, contributed to that failure. So easy on yourself there, embracing all the failure.
Oh yeah, I mean the basketball net is not responsible for any of the failures when a free throw doesn't go in.
Dental school, when you do your first wax up and the guy crushes it in front of you, they train you to feel bad about everything.
They train you to take full responsibility for everything that happens, and that's.
And then, like physicians, who is a team effort. What's interesting is if you do a porcelain veneer on somebody or a composite resin and it breaks, the patient fully expects you to do it over for no charge. When you have a heart bypass and one of the stents fails, believe me, the physician charges for the next procedure. It's the psychology or it's the culture that's built within dentistry. And I said it before, we've seen the enemy and the enemy is us. But it's also taking responsibility for your work and your follow-up and everything else that, again, comes back to having that relationship with the patient. Because I know, Dr. Hoos, you're going to take care of me. I've already received today 3 follow-ups from my automated patient experience. I'm having a little sensitivity. Is that normal? I was able to text back. Thank you so much for the great crown you did for me yesterday. I did 16 units of crown and bridge for somebody yesterday. I followed up with her. She goes, I can't believe how great I feel. And so that's what automated patient experience does. And Zach, I think that what you've given us is an amazing tool.
When I'm in my office with my patients and I do a procedure on them, I tell them, I look them in the eye and I say to them, I'm going to check on you later tonight to see how you're doing. And the patient's probably like, oh yeah, sure. I'll believe it when I see it. And I can say that now with confidence to my patients. I never used to say that because I wasn't sure if I'd remember to do it. And I wasn't sure if I'd get home and my kid would be screaming and I'd have to put her to bed and she'd be waking up every half an hour and I would just forget to do it. But I don't falter in saying that to patients now because I know I'm going to be able to do it. It's even worse actually to say you're going to do it and then not do it than it is to just not say anything at all.
Zach, very, very important. How much time does it take you at the end of the day?
And that's the other thing that I was going to, so I was going to bring that up as well. I mean, I built this system for me. I'm a practicing doctor with 2 offices and I do consulting and other things on the side. I have 2 kids. I have a wife. I am really, really busy. And so I know what it's like to be a practicing doctor, to have to do this stuff consistently. I can follow up with 25 patients in probably 15 seconds. All it takes is the push of the button. The entire program is essentially written to take all of the complicated things in dentistry and reduce them to a single button press. So like I was saying before, if you want to bring patients back into your office, single button press. If you want to text them after their procedure, single button press. It requires absolutely no thinking at all on your part. All the information is laid out there in front of you, and all it asks you is basically yes or no. And Jeffrey had mentioned that it's a very high technology product, but it's intentionally designed for low technology people.
You mean like me?
Yes, like you do.
Well, I'm going to challenge you here. How is it possible that you could check on that many patients in 15 seconds? What is the automated patient experience infrastructure in place that allows you to check on that many patients? Because I'm not understanding it.
So if you know how to use email and you know how to use your practice management software, you can use this product. I don't think anyone out there is incapable of using email and incapable of using Dentrix or SoftDent or EagleSoft or any one of those things. What happens is that you get emails from this program. So imagine you had a personal assistant who worked in your office and picked all this information out and then sent it to you and said, do you want me to do this? Yes or no? So they would say, this patient had an extraction. Do you want me to text them? Yes or no? And then all you'd have to say is yes. and then the action is done for you. So there's no typing, there's no remembering who the patient was or what they had done that day, or looking up their phone number, or having your front desk print out a list of patients and then having them forget because they have to leave early to pick up their kid. It's all completely automatic.
So you've pre-populated the questions, the text to the patients, because you're pretty much asking each patient the same things depending on what procedures they've had. So it's a matter of Joe Smith, crown, root canal, click.
And you don't have to think about what to type. You don't have to think about what to say. It's all pre-scripted for you. If you don't like the scripts, you can change the scripts or you can make your own. But essentially, when I was doing this manually for a number of years, I found that I would say the same stuff to patients over and over again. So I just programmed that into the system so that it would do it automatically for me. Another point I want to add to that is, these other things that I was talking about that are short-term success are the same thing. Everything is laid out for you, and it's a single button press in order to accomplish that. If you want to bring 30 patients into your office for hygiene appointments, single button press, and I guarantee 30 patients are going to walk into your office for hygiene appointments. Well, they're going to call your office for hygiene appointments. They aren't necessarily going to walk in. But that kind of stuff, the combination of things that this does, where it focuses on the short-term success and the long-term success, really means that it pays for itself in the first day. It pays for years of itself in the first day. And then beyond that, it'll continue reaping dividends for you for years to come. And it ends up being like Pringles. Once you start, you can't stop doing it, because the types of responses that you get from people and the things that you can see that it's actually doing for your office, if you were ever to turn it off, you would really, truly miss them when they're gone.
So you created this, and your paths crossed with Jeffrey, and Jeffrey's brought the program into his dental practice, and he was sharing with me the simple amazement at how successful this has been implemented in his practice. It's easy. It gathers all the low-hanging fruit. It helps him in his communication with his patients like nothing before, because you think you have no time. This man doesn't sleep. And I could, when he started to tell me about this, I'm like, where do you have time to communicate with all of these patients? I'm in your office regularly. I see how many patients come through there. How is that even possible? And when he showed me this, he said, this is incredible. This really answers so many of the questions that, if I'm going to say almost every, if not every one of the dentists I've ever encountered face every day.
Yeah.
It really, regardless if your practice is a really large practice with high volume or medium-sized practice or a boutique practice, there's aspects about this program that fit perfectly, because we, again, all have similar issues. That's what I found so amazing about this, and why I got excited to learn more and more about it.
This was a really unintended side effect of starting to do this. When I started to do it manually and I was printing out lists and texting these patients every day, there was an interesting unintended side effect, which is that I started to get really good feedback from my patients every single day. Mm-hmm. And it used to be the only feedback that I got as the dentist or the practice owner was, this hurts, this is sensitive, I need to come back in for an adjustment, I don't want to pay my bill. And all the people who were happy would leave quietly and never really tell me about it unless I solicited it from them. What I experienced was that when I was reaching out to people more regularly, I was getting incredibly positive feedback. I'm not, a magical dentist. I'm a decent dentist, but I was getting feedback from patients every single day that was like, thank you so much for doing this. And I'm talking about like, I do a buccal pit filling on a patient, reach out to them, and they'd be like, oh my God, it was fantastic. It was great. You're such a great dentist. And I started getting that from patients every single day. It actually changed my perspective on practicing dentistry. And I know that's a big thing to say, but when you're a dentist in a practice by yourself, and Jeffrey had mentioned before how isolating it is to be a dentist versus being a physician, where you're surrounded by a team of people, you don't really get exposure to people giving you good feedback, right? I mean, if you're a surgeon and you're surrounded by a team of surgeons and you do a great job in a surgery, you go out for drinks afterwards, people pat you on the back. I mean, that was a great thing that you did. When you do a really complicated extraction and it takes you 15 minutes longer, but you get the thing out and it's done in a really good way, guess what you get? Nothing. except for sometimes I have a dry socket. But when you start messaging these people and they give you this positive feedback, I mean, it really changed my perspective on dentistry. It really made me enjoy it a lot more. And it really opened up my ability to establish relationships with patients because I didn't think that they all hated me. I didn't think that they were all out to get me and they didn't want to pay their bill. These were people who actually genuinely enjoyed the experience of coming into the dentist. And, you know, as I said before, most of those people just leave and they don't say anything to anyone unless you get a random referral. And it's like, oh, that was nice of that person. To get this every single day consistently, to me, very life altering.
If you're interested in knowing more about automated patient experience, please contact Zach at
ape@apedental.com, or you can visit the website apedental.com, ape like the monkey, APEDENTAL.com.
So like anything else, if you don't take that action step, you're not going to get a result. And I have to tell you, it's been a game changer in my practice. And I challenge all